This is ThinkEnergy, the podcast that helps you better understand the fast-changing world of energy through conversations with game changers, industry leaders, and influencers. So join me, Dan Sege, and my co-host Rebecca Schwartz as we explore both traditional and unconventional facets of the energy industry.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Summer Rewind edition of the ThinkEnergy podcast. While we recharge our batteries during these lazy, hazy days of summer, we're bringing back some blasts from our podcast past. We'll be reintroducing some of our most popular interviews that garnered a lot of attention and interest. There's been a lot of talk about the future electrification of energy on the path to net zero. The episodes we've selected are very future-focused with themes around green innovation, renewable energy, and our impact on the environment. So, I hope you enjoy the Summer Rewind edition of today's episode. In the meantime, have a happy summer, and we'll be back on August 15th to kick off another exciting season. Cheers.
Hey everyone, I'm Dan Sege.
And I'm Rebecca Schwartz, both from Hydro Ottawa.
And we'll be hosting the ThinkEnergy podcast. So, are you looking to better understand the fast-changing world of energy? Every 2 weeks, Rebecca and I will be taking you on a tour and discuss some of the coolest trends, emerging technologies, and latest innovations within the energy sector.
We'll be engaging in great conversations with game changers, thought leaders, and industry leaders who welcome the opportunity to share their expertise and views with you, our listeners.
So stay tuned as we explore some traditional and some quirky facets of this industry.
This is the ThinkEnergy podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back. This is the ThinkEnergy podcast. And on today's episode, we'll tackle evolution of transportation. I'm Dan Sege.
And I'm Rebecca Schwartz. Hey Dan, you have an electric vehicle, right?
I sure do.
I'm curious, what's your experience been like? Would you recommend an EV for your one and only favorite co-host?
I would 100% recommend one. I love my little EV. I've actually owned two, and now my wife has just ordered her very own. I have no regrets.
That's good to know. Now, if I could just get a solid pay raise, I'll be able to afford one. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge.
I have some great news about that, Rebecca. First, both the feds and some provinces have great incentive programs. With these rebates, EVs are really much more affordable. In fact, as part of Canada's goal to help fight climate change, there are plans to make owning a zero-emission vehicle more accessible than ever before through addressing affordability and adequate infrastructure. Today's guest will have lots more to say about that.
Ooh, visions of having my very own EV are getting a little bit more clear. You have my attention. Go on.
In fact, the pressure's on. The Government of Canada has mandated 100% of car and passenger truck sales be zero emission by 2035. All kinds of measures will be required to support this transportation evolution. Everything from incentives for zero-emission vehicles to investments in infrastructure to partnerships with auto manufacturers are being pursued.
Wow, that seems so soon, but that's exciting. There are so many more things I'd like to know and ask, so here's today's big questions. Are Canadians ready to embrace this relatively quick transition over to EVs? What are the barriers? And do Canadian businesses and municipalities have a role to play in the EV evolution?
Joining us today, we have Cara Clairman, CEO and President at Plug and Drive, and a prominent leader in the EV space. She's here today to provide us with all of the answers. Cara, welcome to the show. Maybe you could start by telling us a bit about your organization and its mandate.
Well, thanks so much, Dan, for inviting me to do this. Plug and Drive is a not-for-profit, so we're out there trying to educate consumers on the environmental and economic benefits of switching to an electric car. And so most of our work revolves around that outreach and education to help people make the switch.
The Government of Canada has set what some might call an aggressive mandate for 100% of new light-duty vehicle sales to be zero emissions by 2035. Why has Canada set this mandate, and how does it play into the larger picture of net zero by 2050?
So I'm sure a lot of your listeners will know that transportation is actually one of the largest emitting sectors, not just here in Canada, but pretty much everywhere around the world. And in fact, in many provinces of Canada, transportation is the number one largest emitter, larger than industry, larger than buildings. And so we really can't achieve our climate goals if we don't tackle transportation. So, of course, tackling transportation is a few different things, not just EV, but EV is a ready technology that's here that would really, really help in terms of reducing emissions from consumer vehicles, as well as now some medium and even heavy duty. And this opportunity is huge because if you just take Ontario, for example, our number one emission source is transportation, and our electricity grid is already extremely clean. We're about 95% emission reduction if we switch to EVs because our electricity grid here is already about 90+% free of greenhouse gas emissions. And that's true in many provinces of Canada. So if you look at our electricity grid across the country, you have, a number of provinces that are hydro only. So it's, BC, Quebec, Manitoba. And so if you look across the country, we're already about 80% GHG free pretty much. And so it's just such a perfect match with improving the emissions from transportation. Across Canada, we have an extremely clean energy grid. And if you think about our electricity here in Ontario, it's mostly nuclear and hydro, a little bit of solar and wind, a very small amount of natural gas. So we're already about only 5%, 5 to 8% fossil fuel on the grid. So plugging into our cars into that grid offers a huge emission reduction at about 90 to 95%. So that's a long way of saying, requiring new EV sales is a relatively easy way for the government to start making the transition for the transportation personal vehicle fleet, and would allow Canada actually to achieve the net zero by 2050, which it really can't do if it doesn't tackle transportation.
Now, Cara, are you able to expand on how Canada's zero-emission vehicle mandates compare globally? Are we on par with other countries?
Well, I'll answer that question sort of in two parts. How we are now compared to the globe and other countries, and how we will be. Right now, I'd say we're a bit behind because we don't have an aggressive enough set of EV policies, and we have quite a patchwork across the country in terms of provincial policies. And so our adoption rates are actually on the low side relative to a lot of other countries. I'd say we stand around 10th right now, in comparison to other countries that have, better policies than we have. However, the policy of zero emission new sales, right? That's just new sales. So we'll still have gas cars around for quite a while. Zero emission new sales by 2035 is quite progressive, and I would say it's not the most aggressive policy. There are a few countries ahead of us, like Norway has, a mandate for 2025, and there are a number of European countries that have set 2030. But 2035 is definitely in the pack, I would say, in terms of leadership in the top, 10 or 15 countries. What we really need to do, though, is make this a law. Right now we just have a sort of a vague commitment to it, and until it's legislated, it really doesn't have a lot of meaning.
What are some of the main barriers to zero-emission vehicle adoption?
Okay, well, there's lots of barriers still remaining, although we're making lots of good progress. we did a survey about 4 years ago, and I think the results probably would hold true today as well, asking people about what was preventing them from choosing an electric vehicle. And actually, the number one barrier was price, which surprised us. We expected people to say range or lack of public infrastructure or something like that. But 3-to-1, they actually said they thought EVs were too expensive. And so we know that the upfront sticker price is a problem for people. It is still a bit more expensive than the equivalent gas car. What people don't really know is that the total cost of ownership of an EV, even at today's prices, is less. But it's always a challenge to help people understand you're going to pay more now and save later. And we have to help people see the advantage of doing that. So I would say, you know, cost, and then also education, because you have to help people understand that total cost of ownership over time. And actually, to help consumers on that specific point, we've put a really great new tool on our website called Find Your EV Match, which really helps you see the total cost of ownership for electric vehicles. And you can even compare an EV to your existing gas car that you currently drive and see your monthly savings. And so this is a really, really important point. I would also say, of course, you know, we do need more infrastructure, and there still is some range hesitancy concern, but I really believe that the range issue is going away as an issue as the battery technology improves, and of course, as public infrastructure improves.
Okay, Cara, how is your organization working to build consumer awareness and education to help remove consumer concerns around EVs?
Well, I mean, Dan, this is what we're doing every single day. You know, we've built our whole program around helping the consumer get over their concerns. And so we're quite accustomed to every single concern and question people have. And basically, we do it in a couple of ways. We have our EV Discovery Center in Toronto, which is, you know, a bricks and mortar facility. People can come, learn all about EVs, no pressure to buy anything, and test drive the latest makes and models. And we have found through our research that the test drive is key to helping people get over their concerns. And that's been a bit of a challenge during COVID, although we are back to doing test drive. And then secondly, we have our mobile EV Discovery Center, or our MEET, which we take to smaller cities and towns all over to sort of bring the EV Discovery Center concept to them. And so that's a great opportunity for people to learn, again, in a no pressure environment, and it's fun. And then we have our road show, which, you know, where we go out to even farther afield locations for a day or 2 days to give people the chance where they may not have any, for example, any EV dealers in their community. So we're really trying to reach everyone. And so those are the main things that we do. And I would just add that the other program that we have that we find is really helping consumers is our used EV program, which has a rebate attached to it. And we're doing this online through webinars, but it's to help people understand who had that idea, oh, you know, I love an EV, but I think it's just too expensive for me, to help them understand that used EVs are a great opportunity, affordable and available. And in the webinar, we run through, you know, sort of everything you need to know to choose the used EV that's right for you. And then Plug and Drive is offering a $1,000 rebate to anyone who lives in Ontario if you buy a used EV.
Wondering if you can tell us about Plug and Drive's Electric Vehicle Discovery Center and what goes on there.
So the Discovery Center is, as I said, a bricks and mortar facility. A sort of imagine Science Center meets car showroom. If you want to see some photos of it, you can just check it out on pluganddrive.ca. And the great thing there is it's, you know, interactive, fun, like I said, like a science center. People come just for fun to learn. And of course, we aren't selling cars, so people don't have that pressure that they feel they sometimes have when they go to a dealership. And then we have all the makes and models sitting right there for people to test drive. And that test drive is so key to helping someone get over their concerns, because a lot of the times people have a preconceived notion about what an EV might be like, and they don't realize like how fun it is to drive, and that these are really fantastic vehicles with great pickup. And it kind of just reminds people of the quality and the fun. And then we can run through with them how much money they're going to save and the emission reductions. And our stats tell the story. About 35% of the people after visiting the center within 6 months have bought an electric car.
How can Canadian businesses support the transition to electric vehicles? And how can they acquire access to the proper funding?
Yeah, we've started doing a lot of work with businesses. And what we find is, number one, what they can do is look at workplace charging. We know that the home is the number one place people want to charge. About 80% of us plug in our cars at home at night. Take advantage of low time of use prices. It's where it's convenient, all those reasons. But the second place people want to charge is at work. And actually studies out of California have shown that if someone sees a charger at work and then talks to a colleague who has an EV at work, they're 6 times more likely to adopt an electric car. So one of the great things that a business can do is put in some workplace charging and then also do some education around using that charging and help their employees get on board. And some businesses are even offering an incentive to their employees to consider an EV, especially companies that are looking at their own GHG reduction targets, and transportation might be one of the main emitters of their organization. So they can use those chargers for their own fleet. They can electrify their own fleet that way, and they can help their employees. So those are a couple of ways businesses can help support the transition. And then you've asked about access to funding. There is some funding through NRCan. The program is called ZEVIP, ZEVIP, where businesses can apply to get some funding for workplace type charging systems.
It would seem that municipalities across Canada have a large part to play to support the government's mandate and to make charging stations more accessible. In your experience, has this been the case? What's your view on the role municipalities play in the electrification of transit?
Yeah, municipalities do have an important role to play, and I think they are starting to recognize it more and more. So, for example, one role that municipalities are playing, and it's proving really important, is in terms of standards for multi-unit buildings. So, for example, a municipality can require a certain green standard for condos or multi-unit buildings being built in their territory, and that will ensure that the rough-in is there for the plugs in future, and that new buildings will get built with the ability, or sort of EV ready, to help their citizens. Because let's face it, especially in the Greater Toronto area, a lot of people live in multi-unit. And we need to make it possible for these people to plug in. There's other roles they can play. For example, we're seeing a lot of municipalities set up, their own EV policies for their, for public parking, for example, street parking, for different, making certain municipal lots available for charging. There's lots of ways that municipalities can help, and there are. Through the associations, there's sharing, I know, of EV policies across municipalities so they don't have to reinvent the wheel.
All right, Cara, can you talk to us about Canada's electric highway? Can we actually drive our EVs coast to coast?
Yes, you can. It's still not that easy, I have to say. But the thing I always want to remind is that this is not a trip that many people are doing. Maybe some of us have done it once in our life, or, it's a thing that happens very rarely. So it's not as critical. It's more of, again, it's a nice to do. It's sort of a psychological thing. People think, oh, it's great if you can. It's still a challenge, but doable and getting easier. It's something that I would say, it's not a trip I'm ever going to do. And I mean, I drive my car just more locally. So I wouldn't want people to hesitate getting an EV because this isn't the easiest trip to make.
It seems that national sales of EVs are closing in on 4%. What are your recommendations to accelerate the deployment of electric vehicles in Canada?
Well, there's just a whole bunch of things we need to do. So, for example, right now in British Columbia, we're hovering around 10% of new sales, Quebec close to 8%. Ontario, we're down at 2%. And so you can see that the variability in the different policies are leading to very different results. And so there's a couple of things. We need to make some consistency across Canada, because what happens when you have certain provinces with really aggressive policies and certain provinces without it, the vehicle supply goes to those provinces with the more aggressive policies. And then it's really hard for people, for example, in Ontario, to get vehicles. And so that ZEV mandate or ZEV standard that the federal government is talking about is really important for making, you know, some more consistency across the whole country. So I'm very supportive of that. I'd also like to see some consistent building codes across the country. It seems ridiculous that in 2021, we still have condos and apartment buildings being built with no potential for EV charging in the future. And it's so much more expensive to do a retrofit than to do it when you're building a building. So the building codes need to be updated to make sure that the buildings are required to at least rough in for EV charging in the future. So that's another really, really important one. And then, I'd like to say that the time of needing incentives is over. It isn't over. We still do need incentives for the next couple of years. I think we're going to hit price parity in a few years' time, and then we won't need them anymore. But for now, I think we do. And because the environmental benefit is so large, I think it makes sense that governments continue to support it.
What about charging stations? Is charging infrastructure rolling out at the pace to support the transition to 100% zero-emission vehicle sales by 2035?
Well, we do still have more work to do in the area of public charging. But again, I'm one of those people who doesn't think this is as critical to the rollout as some other things. As an EV driver, and Dan, you said you're also an EV driver, we're charging at home. Most of us are charging at home, and we are very occasionally using public charging. I only use public charging a few times a year. And I think I'm pretty typical on a road trip or work trip. And so you do need more infrastructure. We can't have single chargers out there. We need to multiply those. We need them to be in strategic locations. We need them to be in places where you can grab a bite to eat and use facilities and all that. So there's work to do, but I'm not of the view that this is a primary barrier to EV adoption. Really, the infrastructure you need is at home, and it's ready right now.
Cara, can you tell us a bit about the sentiment among automotive manufacturers? Are they embracing the transition to EVs at all?
Well, we're certainly, you really can't turn on your news or open your apps, which is how most of us probably get our news these days, without seeing a new announcement. So we certainly are seeing the commitment to EVs in the future. Where there's a bit of a struggle, I would say, is sort of right now. Right now in Canada, supply is extremely low. It's quite difficult to get vehicles. All the manufacturers are ramping up, but that doesn't happen overnight. And so, we need to do a bit more to get the vehicles in here right now. The exciting thing is, here in Ontario, we're going to be making EVs in the next couple of years. And so the supply challenge will get fixed. And then we're going to see, I think, just massive changes. But for now, the next year to 2 years, we definitely have a struggle to bring in the vehicles. And we have to show to the automakers that Canada is a good place for EV adoption, because of course they send the vehicles where they think the best opportunity is to sell them.
Cara, just wondering, what should consumers know about zero emissions vehicles today? How has technology evolved over the past few years, and are there funding opportunities for consumers looking to purchase one?
Well, of course, I want people to know that EVs are a fantastic option right now. What I hear from a lot of consumers, which is hopeful, is, yes, EVs are the future. I'm sure that we're all going to be driving EVs. But what I think a lot of people don't realize is that they're totally ready for prime time right now. Fantastic quality, good range, everything you really need is already there. And of course, the fun and the super great pickup and all those things too. And so I think, people shouldn't hesitate that when they're ready for a new car, this should be it. In terms of funding opportunities, I would say, of course, the federal government still has its $5,000 rebate available. As we, in the election, we basically got the same government and they have committed to continue that. So we know that will continue. Some provinces have a provincial incentive that layers on top of that. Unfortunately, we don't have that in Ontario right now, which is makes us a little bit of a laggard compared to other provinces. There are now 6 provinces with rebates, which makes it hard for Ontario to attract vehicles. So when people go looking for a vehicle, they're challenged to find one. What I would tell consumers that are looking for one and don't want to have to get on a waiting list is to look at the used market. There's a lot of great options in the used market right now. And of course, as I said, Plug and Drive has a $1,000 incentive to buy a used EV and an extra $1,000 if you scrap an old gas car and buy a used EV. So that's a great option if you can't find the new vehicle that you're looking for.
In your view, Cara, what does the future of Canada look like when it comes to zero-emission vehicles?
Well, I think pretty much everyone has realized, even the most diehard sort of auto analysts who really hesitated on EVs in terms of their reporting. I think even they have realized like this is coming. There's no stopping it. It's the question mark is like how fast, and I think groups like mine and other EV sort of advocacy type groups are really, it's all about how can we get this transition to happen faster? Because if you agree that climate change is a crisis, we really can't wait for sort of a slow market transition. We need to do everything we can to speed it up. So if that includes incentives, that includes building codes, that includes ZEV mandate policies, that includes all sorts of local initiatives to try to encourage people to speed it up. But I do feel very optimistic that, we are going to see a huge swing in the direction of EVs even by 2030.
Okay, Cara, how about we close off with some rapid fire questions?
Okay, skip the favorite word. I really didn't have one.
What is the one thing you can't live without?
Coffee.
What is something that challenges you?
Something that challenges me. Well, I mean, I guess the reality is in a nonprofit setting, you're always having to raise money. And so that's always a challenge for anybody in the NGO sector. That's probably our biggest challenge.
If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Well, I think I would love the teleportation. Oh my gosh. I love EVs, but let's face it, they're still cars. And, they still contribute to gridlock and traffic and all that. And it would just be so awesome to be able to just teleport to some other location.
Now, Cara, if you could turn back time and talk to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell her?
I would tell her to do more public speaking. Who knew I would end up, doing so much public speaking in my career. I really didn't get started in that till I was much older. And I feel like it's a useful skill for any job, just to feel confident talking in front of other people, whether that's 5 people or 500 people. So I would definitely say, get yourself in front of an audience and practice public speaking. And
lastly, what do you currently find most interesting in your sector?
Oh my gosh, my sector is so fascinating. It's funny because I come from the electricity sector as you do. And I think there's a lot of people with this idea that's kind of an old, stodgy, boring sector. And so I find it so exciting that there's so many opportunities for innovation. And it's not just EV, it's storage and renewables. And there's just so much of interest happening in the electricity sector. I hope young people are really looking at it for future career options.
All right, Cara, we've reached the end of another episode of the ThinkEnergy podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today. We hope you had fun.
I did. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the ThinkEnergy podcast. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you're listening. And to find out more about today's guest or previous episodes, visit thinkenergypodcast.com. I hope you'll join us again next time as we spark even more conversations about the energy of tomorrow.